assessment of ascending and descending pathways combines all three pathways: the corticospinal tract for motor function, the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway for sensory function, and the spinal thalamic pathway for sensory function. In this session, the diagrams will be filled out and labeled for you to see the relative positions of the pathways at each level. Notice where the pathways travel together, a lesion at that location may affect more than one pathway. The purpose of this section is to show the proximity of these pathways throughout the central nervous system. Damage may affect 1, 2, or 3 pathways. Notice, for instance, in these diagrams in the medulla, we have the pyramidal tract and the medial lemniscus together, and in the pons, we have the lateral spinal thalamic tract and a portion of the medial lemniscus together. As they come up to the brain, that is up to the internal capsule, they are all close together, and then they spread out over the cortex. Spinal cord level, we can see the lateral corticospinal tract feeding into lower motor neurons, which go out to the muscle and activate muscle. We also see the sensory fibers coming in, cell bodies in the dorsal root ganglion, coming into the dorsal horn, the lateral spinal thalamic tract fibers synapse in the dorsal horn. Their fibers cross over to the other side, at which point they take the position of the lateral spinal thalamic tract, and the fibers for vibration and position travel into the dorsal horn, but instead travel immediately into the cuneate fasciculus and travel up into the brainstem. And fibers coming from the lower cord will travel up in the fasciculus gracilis, and they will also travel up to the brainstem. We'll see that these fibers will occupy opposite positions in the spinal cord. As we come up to the spinomedullary junction, we see the pyramid at the base of the spinomedullary junction. Fibers will cross across the midline at that level, and also fibers for the medial lemniscus begin at this site because the dorsal columns have come up and synapsed at this location for the nucleus gracilis, for the arm, for the leg, and the nucleus cuneatus for the arm. And these will cross across the midline to occupy a position just above the pyramids. And the leg will be lower and the arm will be a little bit higher. And we see the lateral spinal thalamic tract more lateral. As we come to the medulla, a little higher up, the medial medulla, we see the pyramid at the midline. We see the lateral lemniscus at the midline with the leg and the arm, and we see the spinal thalamic tract very laterally. As we move a little bit higher in the pons, we see the corticospinal tract here at the midline. We see now that the medial lemniscus is starting to have the leg move a little bit more laterally, and we see the lateral spinal thalamic tract out laterally near the cerebral peduncle. As we move into the midbrain, the caudal midbrain, we see now in the crus cerebri that we have the corticospinal tract in the middle third of the crus cerebri. We have the medial lemniscus that has moved far lateral to approximate the position near the spinal thalamic tract. We also see the decussation of the superior cerebellar peduncle, periaqueductal gray, and the cerebral aqueduct. As we move into the rostral midbrain, we again see the crus cerebri with the corticospinal tract in the middle third. We also see the red nucleus, And again, we see the medial lemniscus and lateral spinal thalamic tract close together. As we move into the cortex, we now see that the fibers have arrived from the spinothalamic and lateral lemniscus up to the thalamus, and they'll occupy this position in ventral posterior lateral nucleus of the thalamus, and then leave the thalamus after the next neuron to travel in the internal capsule right next to the corticospinal tract, and then distribute over the medial and superior and lateral portion of the postcentral gyrus for the sensory fibers and the origin of motor fibers in the precentral gyrus. We'll now look at lesions in each of these areas and recognize that in each of these we could make a small lesion. In this case in A, the question is which of these produces a sensory loss. We can see that in A we would have corticospinal tract damage here, but we would also have damage to the medial lemniscus on the same side. This would produce sensory loss in the leg. If we come over to the pons, we see that damage in the basis of the pons would produce corticospinal damage, and these are fibers that come from the ipsilateral cortex. This would be fibers that are affected by the basilar artery sitting here, and perforators coming off the basilar artery would cause insult to this region, resulting in damage to the corticospinal tract, affecting paralysis on the other side of the body. Question of which of these lesions contains fibers from the left cortex. Here we're on the left. This is the left side of in this representation, and the corticospinal fibers are traveling here, and this in the crus cerebri is in the same position as the cortex. So this would be B. And we can see the answer here is A, the answer here is C, and the answer here is B. If we look at a lateral view of the brain and want to compare and contrast a middle cerebral artery stroke with an anterior cerebral artery stroke, and the question is what are the symptoms in each of these patients? With a middle cerebral artery stroke, because both sensory and motor fibers are in this region next to the pre and post central gyrus, particularly the face and the arm, there would be contralateral spastic paralysis in the face and the arm, as well as a hemianesthesia for pain and temperature, vibration of position on the contralateral side of the body and the face. But also, if there were deep structures that were affected, including the internal capsule, coming off of the striate arteries, the lenticular striate arteries coming off the middle cerebral artery, that would also catch the corticospinal tract from the leg, and there would be spastic paralysis on the contralateral leg. If there were damage to the anterior cerebral artery, it would capture fibers, cell bodies in the paracentral lobule. That would include the precentral fibers for the leg and the postcentral fibers for sensory of the leg. So you would have spastic paralysis of the leg on the contralateral side and anesthesia for the leg and foot on the contralateral side for all modalities. If we wanted to compare and contrast the effect of an anterior spinal artery stroke with a posterior spinal artery stroke, we would recognize that in the wide distribution of the anterior spinal artery, we have both the corticospinal tract and the lateral spinal thalamic tracts, so that there would be spastic paralysis below this level and on both sides, and there would be loss of pain and temperature on both sides below this level. There would also be, at this level, a loss of reflexes bilaterally. Spared would be vibration, position, and fine touch because the dorsal columns and their input are protected. In a posterior spinal artery insult, there would be loss of the dorsal column lemniscal input because on one side, because the posterior spinal artery feeds only one side, and it would knock out sensation for vibration, position, and fine touch in the arm and the leg at and below this level. In this setting, the question is, what effect would there be of a lesion of this distribution? And we could imagine if a contralateral Babinski, no, the corticospinal tract is coming right down here, and it's going to activate motor neurons on the same side, so there would be an ipsilateral Babinski. A partial sensory loss in the ipsilateral arm. No, it would not be any loss in the ipsilateral arm because this level of spinal cord is at the thoracic level, as we can see from very little portion of the ventral root. And also, would there be a contralateral sensory level? Well, coming right in this position is the lateral spinal thalamic tract, and those fibers all crossed below this level, so there would be a loss of pain and temperature on the opposite side due to loss of the spinal thalamic tract at this site. So in the leg there would be a loss of pain and temperature. Other sensation in the leg would be preserved because it travels up in this region and would not be touched by this. Decreased reflexes in the ipsilateral leg? No, because we're up at the thoracic cord, so it would not affect reflexes in the leg. And then, in fact, there would be increased reflexes in the ipsilateral leg because you'd have an upper motor neuron lesion on this side. Sensory loss in the ipsilateral leg? No. This would sensation in the ipsilateral leg would be preserved here by the dorsal column and by the spinal thalamic tract that's traveling here, which picked up the fibers from the leg. So C is the correct answer.